Welcome, curious listeners, to The Deep Dive. Today, we're plunging headfirst into a truth about money that might just flip your perspective.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
Well, doing well with it actually has less to do with how smart you are and a lot more to do with how you behave.
Okay. So not about complex formulas.
Right. It's rarely about perfect math, but more about the messy, unpredictable world of human psychology.
Exactly. And this deep dive is all about unpacking those hidden forces, the things that really shape our financial decisions. We're drawing our insights from Morgan Housel's book, The Psychology of Money. Really fascinating stuff.
Yeah, it's a great one. And our mission today is basically to distill the most important nuggets, those surprising facts from Housel's work. We want to challenge your assumptions, maybe our own too, about wealth, greed, happiness.
And give you a shortcut, sort of, to being well informed.
Yeah.
Not just what to do with money, but understanding why you might act the way you do around it.
Okay, so let's unpack this core idea first. We're often taught finances like a hard science. Cold, hard numbers, rigid rules.
Right, like physics or something.
Exactly. But the real game changer, as Housel shows, is seeing it's much more about, well, something messier, our own psychology. Why is that shift in thinking so crucial?
Oh, it's absolutely pivotal. Because, financial outcomes aren't just spreadsheets. They're driven by people, by their behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
And what looks completely crazy to one person might make total sense to someone else, just based on their own life experiences, their own mental models.
Right. Different backgrounds, different views of risk.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So understanding your own wiring, your own behavior patterns, that's often way more valuable than your IQ when it comes to money.
And Housel gives these two amazing contrasting stories. First, there's this super smart tech executive, designed patented Wi-Fi stuff in his 20s, started and sold multiple companies, a genius by any standard.
Sounds like it. Set for life, you'd think.
You would. But years later, totally broke. There's even this wild story about him shattering a $500 lamp in a restaurant.
Oh.
Yeah, and when they asked him to pay, he just threw like $5,000 cash at the manager and said, "Get out of my face."
Yeah.
Just complete lack of emotional control around money.
Yikes. So brilliant mind, but disastrous behavior.
Precisely. And then the complete opposite story. Ronald Reed, a humble janitor, gas station attendant from rural Vermont,
Right.
lived a super low-key life, bought a modest house for maybe $12,000 back in the day, lived there his whole life, dies at 92 back in 2014, and makes international news.
A janitor makes international news. Why?
Because this quiet guy had a net worth over $8 million, left millions to his local library and hospital.
8 million.
Yeah.
Seriously. How? Lottery? Inheritance?
That's the kicker. No lottery, no inheritance. He just saved what little he could from his jobs,
Wow.
invested it in solid blue chip stocks, and then he just waited patiently for decades, letting it compound.
Decades. So you have the genius executive going broke
Mm-hmm.
and the humble janitor quietly building a fortune. That really does flip the script, doesn't it?
It totally does. It shows that it's less about raw intelligence or fancy degrees.
And much more about things like patience, controlling your impulses, managing greed. Think about it. What other field is there where someone with zero formal training can massively outperform, a Harvard-educated expert?
That's a great point. It really highlights that financial success is maybe more of a soft skill, deeply
okay.
psychological.
Yeah. And we get told what to do all the time, save 10%, have an emergency fund, blah, blah, blah. But nobody really teaches us about what happens in our heads when we try to actually do those things.
Right. That's where the real battle often is.
Exactly.
Okay, that leads nicely into another really interesting idea, the unseen side of wealth. Howell calls it the man in the car paradox.
Ah, yes, I remember this one.
So you see someone driving a really fancy car, right? A Ferrari, a Lamborghini. What's your immediate thought?
Maybe, wow, nice car. Or, wish I had that car.
Exactly. You rarely think, wow, the person driving that car is cool. Instead, you think, wow, if I had that car, people would think I'm cool.
Huh? That's so true. You project yourself onto the car.
That's the paradox. We often chase wealth, hoping for respect and admiration, but using money to buy flashy stuff. It actually brings less of it than you'd imagine.
Yeah, because people aren't really admiring you. They're just using your stuff as a benchmark for their own desires.
Yeah.
Humility, kindness, empathy. Those probably get you more genuine respect than horsepower ever will.
Definitely. And this connects to another key point. Real wealth is often hidden. You don't usually see it.
Right, like that story Housel tells about Roger, the guy with the Porsche.
Yeah. He pulls up in a new Porsche one week, looks rich. Next week, he's in an old Honda because the Porsche got repossessed. He defaulted on the loan.
So seeing the Porsche didn't tell you he was wealthy. It just told you he spent a lot or borrowed a lot. When it vanished, you just knew he was $100,000 poorer or deeper in debt.
Exactly. It shows the difference between being rich and being wealthy. Rich is often current income, very visible. Big houses, fancy cars, easy to spot.
But wealth is hidden. It's the income you didn't spend. It's the assets you accumulated that haven't been turned into visible stuff yet. It's the nice car not bought, the diamonds not purchased.
So rich is spending, wealth is saving. It's like diet and exercise, maybe.
Yeah.
Getting fit is hard, like getting rich. You work out, you feel good, you want a treat.
Mm.
Being wealthy is like turning down that treat meal consistently. It's creating that gap between what you could spend and what you actually do spend. And that gap grows over time.
That's a great analogy. And because wealth is hidden, it's harder to find role models for it, harder to learn how to build it. We see the spending, not the saving. Society teaches us having money means spending money.
Which is the opposite of actually building wealth. Something to keep in mind when you look at others and when you set your own goals. Are you chasing visibility or building hidden security?
Good question.
Yeah.
And that quiet, consistent building, that brings us to compounding. The real magic, maybe.
Yeah, but it's something we humans are really bad at intuitively grasping. We underestimate compounding because our brains just think more linearly, like step by step.
Totally. It's why the results can seem, well, almost illogical sometimes. Think about the ice ages.
Okay, how does that relate?
Well, for ages, scientists thought it was super cold winters causing these massive ice sheets. Makes sense, right?
Yeah, extreme cold, more ice.
But turns out it wasn't really the brutal winters. It was just moderately cool summers where the snow from the previous winter didn't entirely melt away.
Ah, so a little bit left over each year.
Exactly. That tiny, consistent leftover amount compounding year after year, century after century, eventually built up into ice sheets miles thick. It wasn't the amount of snow, it was the fact that some lasted.
Wow, that's a powerful image for saving and investing.
Isn't it? And it applies perfectly to someone like Warren Buffett, phenomenal investor, obviously. But you look at his net worth, that huge number, nearly $85 billion. The vast majority of it, something like $81.5 billion, was accumulated after his 50th birthday. Actually, after he qualified for Social Security.
Get out! After his mid-60s?
Yep, if he'd started at 30, got those amazing 22% annual returns he's famous for, but then retired at 60 like a normal person,
Right.
he'd have maybe, what, 11 or $12 million? Less than 0.1% of his actual fortune.
That's staggering. So his skill was crucial, but his real secret weapon was just sticking around.
Time, longevity, that's the secret sauce. It's really counterintuitive.
Yeah, because you hear about other investors, like Jim Simons, right? His fund, Renaissance Technologies.
Incredible record. Compounded money at something like 66% annually since 1988. That's 3 times Buffett's rate.
Insane returns. So he must be way richer than Buffett then.
Nope. He's actually about 75% less rich. Why? Because he only really hit that incredible stride later in life. He hasn't had as many decades as Buffett for it to compound.
So even with triple the returns, less time means less overall wealth.
Massively less. If Simons had Buffett's time frame with those returns, his net worth would be in the quintillions or something absurd. It's almost meaningless number territory.
Quintillions. Okay, my brain just broke a little. It really shows the most powerful force isn't necessarily finding the absolute highest return.
But finding pretty good returns that you can stick with consistently for an incredibly long period of time. We focus on how Buffett invested, read all the books on his strategies.
But maybe the real book title should be, This Guy Just Kept Investing Consistently for 75 Years.
Exactly. That's the less glamorous, but maybe more important part of the story. It makes you ask yourself, are you chasing the highest possible returns, maybe taking huge risks? Or are you focused on just giving your money enough time to grow steadily?
The practical takeaway is maybe just learn to shut up and wait.
Pretty much. Let compounding do its thing.
Yeah.
Which leads perfectly into the idea of survival.
Right, because you can't compound if you get wiped out. Getting money is one challenge.
But keeping it, that's a whole different skill set. Survival is maybe the most underrated financial skill.
You think about someone like Jesse Livermore, famous trader, right? Made a fortune betting against the market in the 1929 crash. One of the richest men in the world.
Yeah, legendary. But what happened next?
Well, he got super confident, started making bigger and bigger bets, took on massive leverage, and eventually lost everything. Tragically, even took his own life. He was amazing at getting wealthy.
But terrible at staying wealthy. didn't survive.
Compare that to, say, Michael Moritz at Sequoia Capital, the big venture capital firm.
Decades of success there.
And he says their secret, after 4 decades, is always being sort of afraid of going out of business. They live by the motto, only the paranoid survive. They just assume things can go wrong.
They don't get complacent. That makes sense. It's like Buffett again. His success isn't just the brilliant investments he made.
It's also about what he didn't do.
Exactly. He didn't get carried away with debt. He didn't panic and sell during the, 14 recessions he's lived through. He didn't ruin his reputation. He didn't burn out. He survived.
And that survival gave him the time for compounding to work.
Precisely. There was that other guy, Rick Guerin, who used to invest alongside Buffett and Charlie Munger. Just as smart, apparently.
Oh, yeah. What happened to him?
Well, Munger said Rick was always in a hurry. During a bad market downturn in the early 70s, Guerin was using margin loans. He was leveraged.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. The market tanked, and he was forced to sell his Berkshire Hathaway stock back to Buffett at a huge loss. He couldn't survive the volatility because he wasn't prepared, had the skill to get rich.
But not the temperament or the strategy to stay rich didn't survive.
It reminds me of Nassim Taleb's point. Having an edge and surviving are 2 different things. The first requires the second. You absolutely have to avoid ruin.
So maybe the goal shouldn't just be maximizing returns, but making yourself financially unbreakable first.
That's a great way to put it. Avoiding one catastrophic mistake. One forced sale at the worst possible time. They can do more for your long-term wealth than picking dozens of winners. Yeah. Survival first.
Which ties directly into needing room for error, right?
Yeah.
Planning for things to inevitably go wrong.
Yes. But we often resist this. We kind of have this illusion that someone, somewhere, knows the future. Or we feel like we're missing out if we don't go all in on what seems like a sure thing.
Like we should have a perfectly precise forecast.
Right, but that's dangerous. Think about professional blackjack players, the card counters. They have a statistical edge. They know the odds are slightly in their favor over time.
Okay.
But do they bet everything on one hand? Never. They know that even with good odds, any single hand can lose. Their whole strategy depends on humility, knowing they can't predict the next card perfectly. So they keep reserves, room for error to survive the bad streaks.
That makes sense. Keep enough back so you can stay in the game.
It's why Buffett talks about keeping more than ample cash. He says he prioritizes a night's sleep over the chance of extra profits.
I like that. And Bill Gates, apparently, in the early days of Microsoft, always kept enough cash in the bank to cover a full year's payroll, even if they had 0 revenue.
Just in case. That's room for error. And it's not just about the numbers, the dollars and cents.
What do you mean?
Well, a spreadsheet might show you can technically survive a 30% market drop and still pay your bills.
Yeah.
But what about the mental toll?
Ah, right. The panic, the fear.
The shattered confidence. The urge to just give up and sell everything. That gap between what you can technically withstand on paper and what you can emotionally endure in reality.
Yeah.
That's a vital form of room for error.
Like planning for your own psychological limits.
Exactly. Remember that story about German tanks in WWII?
Yeah.
The most advanced tanks. But they got stopped on the front lines because field mice chewed through the electrical wiring insulation.
Seriously, mice took out tanks.
Apparently. You just can't plan for every single possibility, especially the totally weird stuff. But having that buffer, that margin of safety, helps you endure the unexpected craziness.
So a good plan isn't about predicting the future perfectly. It's about admitting you can't predict it and building in flexibility and safety margins.
That's what lets you stick around long enough for the compounding magic to actually happen.
Okay, but sticking around also means dealing with ourselves and the fact that we change.
Oh, yeah. The ever-changing you. We are surprisingly bad at predicting who will be in the future. What we want today can be drastically different from what we'll want in 10, 20, 30 years.
Housel tells a story about a guy who overcame incredible odds to become a doctor. It was his life's dream, his whole identity.
Okay. Sounds like a success story.
But years later, he tells Housel, awful career, man. The stress, the hours, it just ground him down. He ended up deeply disappointed in the very thing he'd strived so hard for.
Wow. That's tough. Like that end of history illusion psychologists talk about.
Explain that.
We can look back and see how much we've changed in the past, our tastes, our beliefs, our goals, but we consistently underestimate how much we will change in the future. We think our current self is the finished product.
But we're not. Our future selves might want very different things.
Exactly. And that creates a real conflict for long-term financial planning. Compounding needs consistency, avoiding interruptions. But how do you stay consistent for decades if your own goals and desires keep shifting.
That's a really tricky problem. So what's the solution?
Well, one suggestion is to avoid extremes in your financial life. Don't commit to plans that require, say, extremely low income forever or working insane hours for maximum income until you drop.
Why not?
Because the initial appeal might wear off, but the downsides like poverty in retirement or realizing you missed your whole life chasing money, those become lasting regrets for that future version of you. Balance increases endurance.
Okay, avoid the extreme paths. What else?
Embrace the idea of no sunk costs. Don't feel trapped by decisions made by a past version of yourself. If a career path or a financial goal chosen by past you no longer makes sense for current you,
You should be willing to abandon it.
without mercy. The quicker you cut your losses on a path that's no longer right, the sooner you can pivot and start compounding again on a path that actually fits who you are now. Flexibility is key.
So when you make long-term plans, build in the expectation that you might change and allow for that.
Definitely. Prioritize adaptability.
All right, let's talk about costs, because nothing's free, especially in investing, right? Even if it looks easy from the outside.
Oh, absolutely. This is a big one. Success always looks easy when you're not the one doing it. Like the S&P 500 index went up, what, 119-fold over 50 years? Sounds like you just buy and relax.
Yeah, sounds simple enough. Free money.
Huh, if only. It demanded a price. And the price, the currency of successful investing, it isn't just dollars. It's dealing with volatility, fear, doubt, uncertainty, regret, all that emotional turmoil along the way.
Like that Netflix example.
Exactly. Netflix stock returned something insane, like 35,000% between 2002 and 2018. Amazing, right?
Incredible.
But during that same period, it traded below its previous all-time high on 94% of the days. 94%. Imagine the doubt, the fear, the regret you'd feel holding it through all those down periods. That's the price you paid for that return.
Wow. Most of the time it felt like you were losing, even though long-term it was a huge winner.
Precisely. And many investors try to avoid paying that price. They try to get the return without the volatility. They trade in and out, try to time the market.
Trying to get something for nothing.
Yeah, like a shoplifter.
Yeah.
But they often end up paying double in the end through bad timing or missed gains. Even big companies try this, like GE or Fannie Mae back in the day, trying to smooth their earnings to look less volatile.
And then the bill eventually came due with huge losses.
Yep, the market demands its price. The key is how you view that price.
Right.
Is market volatility a fine or a fee?
What's the difference?
If you see a market drop as a fine, like a punishment for doing something wrong, your instinct is to avoid future fines by getting out, by selling. But if you see it as a fee, like the cost of admission to Disneyland, you pay the fee because you expect the ride to be worthwhile, then you're willing to endure the volatility.
Right.
It's the price you pay for the potential of higher returns than, say, for options like cash or bonds.
So reframing volatility from a penalty to an admission ticket.
That's the mental shift. It's crucial for sticking with your investments long enough for them to actually work for you. You have to find the price, understand it's necessary, and then be willing to pay it.
That's a really useful way to think about it. Now, related to fear and volatility, why is pessimism so darn seductive?
It really is, isn't it? Deirdre McCloskey said, "For reasons I have never understood, people like to hear that the world is going to hell." Pessimism just sounds smarter somehow, more intellectual.
Yeah, an optimistic forecast often sounds naive or simplistic, while doom and gloom sounds thoughtful and realistic.
And optimism doesn't mean believing everything will always be perfect. It's more like believing that, despite setbacks, the odds of a good outcome are generally in your favor over the long run. It's the simple idea that most people wake up trying to make things a little bit better, not worse.
But pessimism gets more attention. Like that Russian professor in 2008 predicting the U.S. would break apart by 2010.
Oh, I remember that. California going to China, Alaska back to Russia. Totally outlandish stuff.
But it made the front page of the Wall Street Journal. During the financial crisis, people ate it up. Now, imagine someone in 1945 making an optimistic, but ultimately accurate, forecast about Japan's incredible post-war economic boom.
They would have been laughed out of the room. Called crazy. Pessimism just has this pull.
So why? Why does it prevail so often?
Well, a few reasons Housel points out. One, money impacts everyone. So a recession or market crash gets universal attention in a way a localized disaster like a hurricane doesn't. There's always a demand for narratives explaining why things went wrong, which feeds more worry.
Okay, it's relevant to everyone.
Two, pessimism often just extrapolates current negative trends indefinitely. ignoring our ability to adapt and solve problems, like those peak oil predictions in the 2000s.
Right, we were all going to run out of oil.
But they didn't account for how high prices would incentivize new tech, like fracking, which massively increased supply. Markets adapt. People adapt. Pessimism often misses that.
And the third reason,
Progress is slow, but setbacks are fast. Growth, like that compounding ice sheet, happens gradually, almost invisibly over time. But destruction, a market crash, a bankruptcy, a plane crash happens in an instant. It grabs headlines.
like the Wright brothers' first flight, barely getting noticed for years, but one fatal crash bringing huge attention to aviation.
Exactly. Medical breakthroughs save millions over decades, quietly. One terrorist attack kills dozens instantly and dominates the news for weeks. Setbacks are just more dramatic than slow progress.
So we need to be aware of pessimism's intellectual allure. Short-term caution that paranoia for survival is good.
But don't let it blind you to the incredibly powerful, quiet force of long-term optimism and human ingenuity.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of psychological ground. How do we bring this all together for ourselves, for you listening?
Well, the first thing is acknowledging there's no single universal answer. Just like a doctor needs to know you before prescribing treatment, nobody can tell you exactly what to do with your money without knowing your goals, your timeline, your tolerance for risk, your emotional makeup.
It's deeply personal.
Deeply personal. But there are some actionable principles that emerge from all this psychology.
Like what?
Well, less ego generally leads to more wealth, meaning suppress the urge for flashy spending today to build more options for tomorrow. Be okay with things going wrong, accept that most individual investments might not work out, focus on the portfolio, the few big winners drive returns.
Okay, humility, diversification.
Definitely. And worship room for error. That margin of safety is what gives you endurance, what lets compounding happen. Avoid extremes in your plans because you will change, and balance reduces future regret. And define your own game.
What do you mean by define your game?
Know your time horizon, your goals. Don't get swayed by what other people are doing because they might be playing a completely different game with different rules and timelines, like a day trader versus a retiree. Very different games.
So figure out what success means to you and stick to your own strategy.
Right. Housel shares his own personal approach as an example. His main goal, independence.
Ah, like his parents you mentioned earlier, the ER doctor who quit.
Exactly. He saw how living below their means gave his dad the freedom to leave a high-stress job after 2 decades. So for him and his wife, independence means doing work they like with people they like on their own terms.
So how do they translate that into action?
They basically kept the same moderate lifestyle they had in their 20s. As their income grew, almost all the extra just went into savings into their independence fund. They consciously avoided lifestyle inflation, that keeping up with the Joneses trap.
Smart. But probably hard to do.
Very hard. And it leads them to make choices that might look wrong on paper to a pure finance optimizer.
Like what?
Like owning their house outright, no mortgage. Financially, maybe leveraging cheap debt is smarter. But for their peace of mind, being debt-free feels right. Or keeping a big chunk of assets, like 20% in cash.
20% in cash? That sounds really conservative.
It is. But it's their buffer, their sleep well at night money, ensuring they'll never be forced to sell stocks during a downturn just to pay bills. It's about endurance, not maximizing every last percentage point.
So their investing isn't about fancy stock picking either.
Nope. They shifted mainly to simple, low-cost index funds. Their strategy relies on a high savings rate, patience, and just a general optimism about long-term global economic growth, not complex timing or selection.
It sounds like their ultimate goal isn't necessarily the biggest possible number.
But financial independence and the ability to sleep well. And for many people, mastering the psychology of money is really about achieving exactly that, finding what works for you and your peace of mind.
So we've really journeyed through these hidden biases, the quiet power of time, why survival is so key, the hidden costs. It's been a real deep dive into the why behind our money behaviors.
It has. And as we wrap up, maybe a final thought to leave you with. Remember that analogy Housel uses, the alien circling Earth?
Oh, yeah, looking down at the economy.
Right. And the alien sees the same cities, the same factories, the same knowledge, the same tools in 2009 as it saw in 2007. Nothing physical really changed much. Yet, it couldn't understand why the humans felt so much poorer and more panicked in 2009.
Because the only thing that had really changed
was the stories people were telling themselves about the economy, about the future, about their own finances.
That's powerful. So the question for you listening is, what stories are you telling yourself about your money right now, about the economy? Are those stories helping you reach your actual goals? Or are they maybe just narratives you've created to fill in the gaps of what is ultimately unknowable?
It's a good reminder that your personal history, your unique experiences, they shape your financial lens in ways you might not even realize. And just understanding that, becoming aware of your own psychology around money, that's probably the most important first step.
A perfect place to end. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.